So I figure with Brexit coming up more and more, I figure we'd go over just some of the stuff Brexiteers would say was never going to happen and was just Project Fear. So, starting from the top of the list, Unilever has moved its HQ to Rotterdam. Land Rover has shifted investment, major investment in fact, to Slovakia. And that's a UK company. Airbus warns it will have to quit the UK if supply chains are delayed. And of course, as we've said multiple times, if we leave the single market, then supply chains are going to be disrupted, there will be delays, and we live in an economy where even a delay of 30 minutes to an hour could cost hundreds of billions of pounds. That's the world we live in, and people don't want to seem to admit that. They don't want to seem to admit that this is the reality, but there you go. BMW, so that's Mini and Rolls-Royce, have also said the same thing. So that's hundreds more jobs as well. Honda, the UK assembly plant, the only one in the EU, has said they will also move as well. So that's, and again, that is the only Honda plant in the EU moving out of the UK to somewhere in the European Union. All those jobs gone. Siemens has also said the exact same thing as well. They can't afford these delays that leaving the single market will impose on goods as well. So they're going to go as well. And this is the best one because this came out recently. So the Foreign Secretary of all people, Boris Johnson, gets basically recorded saying, fuck businesses. Only the cornerstone of your economy, he's basically just said, yeah, or Sodom. See, this is why you listen to experts, because more often than not, the experts know what they're talking about. Boris Johnson is an expert, and he is singly the worst foreign minister I think the UK has ever had. So, city firms have begun to migrate to Dublin, Frankfurt and Paris. Only just a couple of days ago we did the video about Jacob Rees-Mogg has moved his firm to Dublin. You've got other firms that are also going to move as well. Banks in particular are going to move. You've got pharmaceutical companies as well. When the new place has been chosen for the new European head of pharmaceutical regulation, they have said they will move wherever that goes to because it is more important for them to be closer to that than it is in the UK when it moves. This is just part of all these things. Project Fear is never going to happen. Apparently, they said, but yeah, look. We're continuing on this list. So the UK's place in Galileo, all that money we've funded into Galileo has just been flushed down the toilet. So that's a massive, massive blow to the UK space industry. And, and defence as well. Is that good? And there's now all these Brexiteers saying, oh, we can create our own system. With what? The Galileo system was developed in, I think it was in half the time it took the US or other countries to develop a similar pattern, a similar satellite system. So, yeah, working with Europe is a plus, and working with other countries, this is how you get shit done. But Brexiteers don't seem to think that is the case. So immigration from the EU has already begun to decline because of the hostile environment, and I absolutely agree. It's opened a unfortunate can of worms of people just now thinking, yeah, they can be openly racist now. So agriculture and construction sectors have started to see huge labour shortages as Brits don't like these jobs. It's true, and you're going to have huge repercussions for this. Remember, right at the very start, 80% of all small farms, because of the subsidies that they are going to lose from the EU, are potentially looking at bankruptcy or losing their businesses altogether. So that's going to have a massive knock-on effect as well. And construction, we are already in the middle of, well, we are not in the middle, but we are in a huge housing crisis in the UK. We need to build more affordable houses, but we can't if there's a labour shortage. Where were we? Yeah, the Prime Minister has repeated the lie over a Brexit dividend for the NHS. Constantly, Theresa May has time and time again said that there's no such thing as a magic money tree. Yet, to bribe the DUP, she magically pulls all this money out of seemingly nowhere from this magic money tree, and now she's saying, oh yeah, there's going to be this massive Brexit dividend. And literally, every single economic expert and tax expert has basically said, where are you going to get this money from? So, you know, magic money tree away. So, yes, so also shortages of nurses and doctors from the EU have deepened the NHS crisis. So, you know, freedom of movement to get all these people with the crucial skills we need in this country, oh, no longer. They don't want to come here. So, and this is the best one. So, a proposed custom deal is so complex that its acronym for it is being called CRAP. That is C-R-A-P. And I'm not making that up. That was an actual proposed customs deal. Now, I don't know if someone was just having a joke or was generally like, yeah, this is so bad, we're just going to call it that, but good on them for it. So young people, like myself, don't want to lose their rights in Europe. No, I don't want to lose my rights, because being able to have access to Europe and be able to live and work anywhere in Europe is a massive boon, particularly for someone like me in the media industry, because particularly during some of the quiet parts, times in Europe, well, sorry, in the UK, I can go and work for other companies very, very easily. I have to fill out no paperwork of any type, and a company can just go, yeah, easy, we'll hire you. You know, that's how it works. But you know, these idiots don't seem to see the value in that, and vice versa as well, because companies, British companies, can now get other experts in or headhunt people from Europe as well. But you know, again, that's going to have a massive knock-on effect. So, only grandparents don't get it. They will fairly soon, leaving behind a sad mess. And yeah, I completely and utterly agree with this point. It was the older generation that voted for it based on, and to quote what some people have been leaving me in other messages, I just wasn't alive for the time before we joined the European Union, or well, what was the start of the European Union. You only have to go back and take a look at the economic history of the UK post-World War II up to 1975, when we joined. We were literally in not a very good position. We were known as the sick man of Europe. That is the position we were in. It was that bad. And yet, joining Europe reversed that. And yet here we are, leaving Europe to go back to that. But then there you go. Boris Johnson again said that the unsolved Northern Ireland border problem is exaggerated. So, the Good Friday Agreement, probably one of the best peace proposals there has ever been in certainly the 20th century, that pretty much stopped the violence in Northern Ireland and solved all these problems that we were having of, you know, Irish terrorists, and people forget that was a thing at one point. You don't hear anything about that anymore now. But there you go. Potentially, we are looking at the troubles starting again in Northern Ireland, and potentially IRA terrorism in the mainland UK. This could be a potential thing. So, you know, thanks Brexiteers, you know, whatever. So this is the best one. So the talk of free trade in the Anglosphere is sunk by Trump's global protectionism. And that was the best thing, because Trump was like, yeah, you'll be the head of the queue for a trade deal. And now all his trade policies, his tariffs are incredibly damaging what is left of the steel industry in the UK. Australia and New Zealand have already threatened to take us to the World Trade Organization court over lamb meat. You know, yeah, the Anglosphere free trade agreement isn't looking very good. And of course, the top one, the UK economy has sunk to the bottom of the G7 growth ranking. It has already been, some economists are already saying that our economy, just from these 2 years alone, has already sunk by like 2.1%. And what's going to happen now when we leave? It's going to sink even more. And trying to paper over these cracks and things like that will not be effective long term. You know, all these Brexiteers were recently celebrating about the fact that so the VA Systems has got the new thing for an Australian destroyer. Well, that will take, I think, approximately 4 years. I think maybe a bit more. But after that, then what? What happens to that area and those things? You know, because that's only a very localized area. It doesn't massively affect the rest of the UK. Being in the single market and customs union will affect the UK on a greater, more positive scale than us being able to build a destroyer for the Australian Navy. But you know, this is where we are. Brexit is going to be awful. It is going to be terrible, and there are a lot of people in this country who are, when it does start to get awful and terrible, who are not even going to be able to admit what has happened to this country. They are not going to take responsibility that it was their fault. And as I've said before and pointed out before, Brexit and the Brexiteers are uniquely responsible for this situation that they have put us in. But, you know, there you go. And we are in a yet another situation, because I'm doing this on the 2nd, and Friday, end of this week, is when the big Chequers summit is meant to be, when the cabinet is meant to finally get together and sort out what Brexit deal they want. And we'll probably go more into that later. But we've also got the rumours and stuff coming out of Whitehall that there's another white paper coming out, and it is so bad that apparently I think it was David Davis ripped it up because he was so embarrassed by it. So, you know, sooner or later, people have got to realise the EU might not be perfect, but it was better than being out by ourselves. I said, if you don't like globalism, I'm sorry, but that horse has bolted. And it wasn't up for the EU to solve these problems. Now, they did, in a way. They provided huge area development funds, business fundings, and the like to Britain and all the other member countries as well. But the problem was the government, first of all, just didn't produce enough good policies to be able to attract businesses, and that had nothing to do with the EU, by the way. It had, basically, I can tell you from the perspective, and I know people who basically for a time, even when that funding was available, had no idea until they met someone from the European Union who said, oh yeah, you can apply for this funding. And they were like, oh, I had no idea this funding was available, because the UK government didn't even advertise that this funding was available. So, you know, all the problems that a lot of people assign to the EU are not the EU's problem or fault. They are our own government's fault, because they've been able to use the EU as a convenient scapegoat. You know, it's our own government's fault that the NHS is in the position it is. And Brexit's only going to make it worse. The housing situation, that's the government's fault. The economy situation, that is the government's fault. Remember, as the UK, we are still suffering from the 2008 crash. So, honestly, if you can tell me this, a lot of the economists are basically saying, look, when we leave, we are going to put ourselves at a really bigger risk of a recession. You've already got a lot of people, particularly when they look at the USA, with its constant boom-bust cycle happening, basically saying, look, there's another crash going to happen in the US. If another crash does happen in the US, and we are not in the European Union, and we are out of it, how bad will that affect us then? Considering that we are still suffering the effects of the 2008 crash. You know, these things are solvable, but the problem is the government particularly doesn't want to seem to be solving them. And Brexit is not going to be an answer to these problems, because it is being ideologically driven by these people like Jacob Rees-Mogg, who are complete laissez-faire capitalists, who are basically, the government should have nothing to do with regulating the economy in any way, shape or form. And that includes workers' rights, minimum wage, all the protections that we have had over the years. Not even going to work. You know, a perfect example was right at the start. You had Mark Dyson. Mark Dyson came out and basically said, I want to be able to force my workers to work paid overtime. But the EU Working Time Directive basically says, no, you can't force your workers to work overtime. He wants to do that to his workers. And that's one of the many things we will, you know, lose. But, you know, Brexiteers, they're like, oh, whatever, we'll sort it out. Can you honestly trust Jacob Rees-Mogg as Prime Minister, which I think that's when he's going to make his play after Brexit, because then no one can blame the mess of Brexit on him when you absolutely can. He'll do all this stuff. You'll lose your rights. Your protections as a worker will be loosened. The government has done nothing about zero-hour contracts. In fact, you can say that their silence on zero-hour contracts has been taken as an implicit endorsement of zero-hour contracts. So good luck for your, you know, your partially work on that. But that's the situation we're in. because of these people who were ideologically driven for sovereignty when we were an absolute sovereign nation. Every single member of the EU 28, as we are currently, soon to be 27, is an independent sovereign nation. And most of the laws that the EU does, overwhelmingly, are to do with regulation of trade and workers' rights. And the whole reason they want to drive this is because they want to get rid of these regulations, weak as they may be. And as I've said many times, you come to, you look at the Eurosceptics from Europe compared to the UK, and there's one very key difference. First of all, Eurosceptics in the UK basically say that the EU regulations go too far, they're too big, oh no, they're so bad. But you go to the Eurosceptics from Europe, and they're like, no, the EU doesn't go far enough in their regulations. They need to be more. They need to extend these protections for workers' rights and other things like that. But you know, well, whatever. You know, I've rambled too long on this video now. But yeah, that's the ludicrous situation we're in. We're in a situation where, is anyone seriously going to start calling out the absolute ludicrousy of Brexit? And there are MPs that are calling out, and they should be applauded. And I think afterwards, any Brexit MP should generally resign in shame from the damage they've done. But you know, there we go. So anyway, that's enough of my rambling for the time being.